Listen, this is too good not to share. Y'all get into this word, okay? Hey y'all, it's Monae. Welcome back to my channel. Y'all, I am reading in the book of Samuel, and oh my God, this chapter has been wrecking my mind. It has been just making me just really study the Israelites, study the prophets, and just God is nothing to play with. In the 21st century, in the first century, God has never been the one to play with. And this chapter is proving that even more to me. But right now we're going to talk about Saul's disobedience. So I'm just going to give a quick synopsis of what's happening in this great book of Samuel really quickly. Samuel's mother desired a child. She couldn't conceive. She went to the Lord. Eli came to her and told her that she was going to bear a child. She dedicated her child to God. Once she became pregnant, it was a son. She dedicated her son back to God. She sent her son with Eli. Her son was Samuel. God called Samuel. He said, "Here am I." Samuel served God all his life. Samuel was known amongst all the Israelites as being a prophet. The Israelites wanted a king. Mind you, the Israelites didn't need a king because they served God. Like God was ruling them. But the Israelites, they looked and they coveted after other nations, and they realized, oh, this nation has a king, that nation has a king. We want a king too. Samuel talked to God about it. Samuel's the prophet, and God says, if the people want a king, give them a king. Although they didn't need a king, they wanted a king. And God said, whatever they won't give it to them, although God did not ordain for them to have a king. That's a whole story in itself. We'll talk about that one in the next video. God told Samuel exactly who the king was going to be and what his characteristics were going to be like. Fast forward, this king ends up being King Saul. And if you're familiar with the story of David, you are very familiar with King Saul. King Saul was chosen to be the Israelites' king. They were excited about this king at first until they realized that their desire for this king was unwarranted and against God's plan, but now they have to live with it because they wanted it real bad. How many of us have had a situation like that where we want something real bad and God is telling us we don't need it, and then we end up getting it, and then we realize why we didn't get it, or we end up not getting it, and then we say, God, thank you for not giving it to us, because it would have been even worse. But they ended up getting what they wanted, although it wasn't what God intended for them to have, which is a whole story in itself, but we can deep dive into that a whole nother video. But so they have this king, King Saul, and at first it's all good until it's not. But there's an instance in this story that I just want to talk about today. So Saul had called for Samuel to come, and Samuel was going to burn offerings unto God on behalf of the Israelites. In this time, only priests and only the priests were the ones that were able to burn the sacrifices unto God. Saul was waiting for Samuel's arrival so Samuel can make the sacrifices to God. But Samuel didn't come when Saul thought he was. So King Saul decides upon himself, not being a priest, he was not authorized to do so. He determined among himself that he was going, if you want to follow along, this is in 1 Samuel 13, but he decided that he was going to burn offerings and priest offerings himself and offer them to God himself. He thought he was doing righteously because he was doing it unto God. So behold, that's what he did. And then Samuel came and met King Saul. Samuel was the one who was supposed to do it in the first place. And he says, what hast thou done? And Saul said unto him, because I saw that the people scattered and you didn't come within the days you said you were. He decided that he was going to burn offerings unto the Lord. And Samuel said to Saul, thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord hath commanded thee. King Saul thought that he was burning offerings unto God and doing it righteously. But even though he was burning them unto God, he was still in error. Mic drop. So you may ask, how is King Saul offering burnt offerings to God in error? The reason it's in error is because God's sovereignty and God's law and God's commandments did not allow King Saul to bring him burnt offerings because he was not authorized to do so. That's not the way God ordained for it to be. God's law was for the priests to do so. That was on Samuel to do that. So although the act itself of giving offerings to God is necessary and needed, if you do it unrighteously, if you do it outside of what God and how God intended for it to be done, you're still in error. How many times are we doing things in the name of God, but in our hearts we're operating in error? Y'all, that's a whole nother person. Saul thought he was doing a good act. But there's a word that I want to just talk to y'all about, and I mentioned it already. Sovereignty. Sovereignty. Sovereignty is supreme power. Freedom from external control. The controlling influence. Autonomy. One that is sovereign. Okay? So God is the supreme power, which means that whatever he commands, no external influence, no external thought process, nothing outside of him makes sense, because what he has set in place is the foundation that everything else has to be built on. So if God commanded for only the priests to be the ones to burn offerings, I don't care if he was king or not, his role as king did not authorize him to burn offerings, which made it wrong in the eyesight of God. And Samuel told him that you have not kept the commandment of God, that he operated foolishly. So obviously, although these stories happened thousands and thousands of years ago, I can't help but bring it into now. I can't help to bring it into the 21st century now times. It is so easy, we see it all the time, for people to do things and feel that they're doing it with the heart of God, but really they're not. There's a lot of times where we can do things and feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing because it feels right, but it's not necessarily what God has ordained. It's not necessarily what God has put in place for it to happen. There may be some things that we may feel like in ourselves, okay, well, maybe I can get away with this because it's not overtly wrong. But what about the little thing? God judges every matter of the heart. Saul knew in his heart that although burning offerings was necessary to do unto God, Saul knew that he was not a priest. He knew that he was not authorized to do so, which is why he waited for Samuel. All he had to do was wait, and it was going to be done the right way. But because of his impatience, he decided to step above that. But God is a God of order. God is a God of timeliness. God is a God of order. The way that God ordains things is to be done the way he ordains it. Period. So even us now in these times, we have to be sure that we're not operating out of our own mindset of what we think God wants to be done. Because it's so easy to think, because I feel it's right, it must be God urging me to do it. But we have to learn to try the spirit. Okay, is this me speaking? Is this God speaking? Or is this the enemy speaking? Am I coming from my own mindset and my own thoughts? Is this the enemy trying to influence to do something? Or is this God trying to lead me to do something? We have to be able to discern the spirit and where it's coming from. Because we don't want to be like Saul and feel like we're doing things that God may be leading us to do, but in reality it's ourselves. In reality, it's the enemy trying to confuse us. God's plan is perfect. God's sovereignty is perfect. Although it may not seem bright in our eyes, it may seem like that's the right thing that should be happening. But if God said only the priest, then that's only on the priest. What I love to tell people all the time is that when we are given a role in God, we should not covet other roles. We should try to do our best in the roles that we have and excel in the roles that we're in. And we're going to fulfill our purpose. Like, we are a body of Christ. We're a body of baptized believers. You may be the hand and I may be the foot. I'm not going to be upset that I'm not the hand, because the hand serves the purpose of itself. But the hand can't do what the foot do, right? So versus me coveting something else from someone else, I have to be freely to walk in the call that God has given for me to do, and do it to the best of my ability, because that's where the glory will be. That's where my glory will be. Saul's glory was going to be in him being a righteous king, not in him being a priest, because God didn't make him a priest. So him serving his purpose as a king, he could not do things of the priestly level. All he should have did was focus on the king task and excelled in that. But because he crossed over it, he trespassed against the law of God, right? And then I always like to say too, the perfect, just an example, just for for better understanding, the role of a wife, right? I'm a wife. I can't try to operate as a husband. I can't try to do what the husband is supposed to do, right? Because if I try to overstep and just put my wife's duties to the side to be the husband, who's going to fulfill the role of the wife? And then now the marriage is going to be operating in error. No, I'm the wife. I'm the weaker vessel. I submit to my husband. And submission is not bondage. Submission is really a power and a superpower and a gift that God has given for women to live, to walk in, right? And with me being that way, I can better fulfill the role of a wife and bring glory to my marriage versus coveting the role of the husband and then something's lacking. If we do how it's intended to do in the will of God, everything will be done righteously, because he's a righteous God. But as soon as we walk outside of that, we're opening ourselves to the judgment of God. Samuel tells Saul that you operated in error. So God was going to bring another king whose kingdom was going to reign, who's after God's own heart, because Saul was not after God's own heart, but the next king was going to be. But I just wanted to use this time to just encourage someone to walk in the truth of what God is calling you to do. Walk in the truth of what God has commanded for us to do. Do not get confused by your own mindset. Don't get confused by what you may feel is right. When we walk in God's perfect will, there's no way that we can go wrong. Even if something may be seeming to go wrong, it's always going to come through on the greater side, because we're more than conquerors. So we may go through trials and things like that, but there's always going to be glory. There shall be glory after this. Okay, suffering don't last always, because it's going to reap glory in the end, right? It's always best to do it the way that God has called it to be done, because he's sovereign and not what our own minds are allowing us to do. Let's not be like the King Saul. Let's not get in our own way. Let's not get impatient with the work of God. Let's do what God has called for us to do. Walk in the authority that he's given for us to walk in. And let's wait on the Lord. And let God come and show his power. Not in our own might. We don't want to do what we want to do. But we in our hearts just want to strive to do what God is calling for us to do. Because his will is the will that we should be in. Not of our own minds. Not of our own hearts. Our hearts will fail us. Men's hearts will fail us. But the mind of God, the safest place in the whole wide world, the will of God is the place where we should want to be. So I encourage you to seek the mind and the will of God. Not of ourselves, not of Taylor Monae, not of whoever is watching this video. But Lord, I want to be in your will. And let his will be done. And let's see how his will plays out in our life. And I know that it's going to reap glory. So thank y'all for tuning in. If y'all want to join in on this Bible plan, I'm going to put the Bible plan link in the description box. I encourage you to read through the book of 1 Samuel. It's really been blessing me, and I hope you learned something from it just as much as I'm learning from it. But I hope you have a blessed day. I'll see you on the next video. God bless.